during, for some people, I'm sure, is a very busy climate week. My name is Dorina Mann. I'm a senior managing consultant at ICF, which is the implementer for the USAID Resources to Advance LED's Implementation Project, or RALI. I'll be presenting today with my colleague Helena Caswell, who is part of the ICF team as well. I also want to note on the line, we also have Jennifer Leash and Amanda Valenta from USAID, who have been our partners on the USAID side, who will be on the line and who have been supporting this work. So I wanted to acknowledge them, and they will also be available for questions at the end. Under the RALI project, we've been working on understanding the challenges that face women entrepreneurs in the clean energy space, which includes renewables and energy efficiency. And we've been trying to identify ways that programs, accelerators, and incubators can address biases and promote more gender-inclusive spaces. We're really excited to share our findings with you, as well as resources that we've developed that we think can support those in the clean energy space and in the LEDs community in creating a more gender-inclusive clean energy future. So, an overview of our presentation today. I'll just give a short introduction of the USAID RALI project to let you know kind of where we're coming from. We'll give an overview of the status of women in clean tech and the business case for gender equity. And we'll just highlight some of the barriers to entry that we've identified before we talk about the resources that we've created to address some of these barriers and ways that we can promote women's leadership and entrepreneurship. During this entire webinar, please feel free to enter your comments and your questions in the chat box that you will see located on the Adobe screen. We're certainly interested to hear your experiences and to have a discussion at the end of this to build on this work. So a little bit more about the USAID RALI project to start. So this was a 5-year program that supports technically rigorous development and implementation of low emissions development strategies, or LEDs. Our project has been focused on providing tools and technical assistance to USAID and developing country partners on a number of different topics, ranging from clean energy implementation, greenhouse gas accounting, and to this gender component that we'll be discussing today. Our program has been addressing issues as they come. It's very much demand-driven, and we'll talk a little bit more about where this project came from and what we're responding to. We're actually also very excited to be spending today with all of you on the line. Today is actually the last day of the RALI project. So this is our final webinar, and it's bittersweet, but we're closing out the project and we're closing out a lot of these activities. We're hoping that this gets into the community and gets used after we're done. Wanted to show some examples of the RALI project as we're finishing up. We do have a number of other tools and other pieces that are related to clean energy that might also be of interest to some of you. One key product, flagship product, I would say, would be the Clean Energy Emission Reduction Tool, the CLEAR tool. This is an online calculator that's publicly available, free, to anyone can access to estimate and project emissions reduced and avoided from various clean energy activities. And we cover 16 interventions. This product was built according to international protocol, so it supports transparency under the Paris. We've developed a lot of products on NDC implementation support, and notably the RALI greenhouse gas MRV harmonization framework, which is available online on Climate Link. This product helps countries go step by step in figuring out how to account for their mitigation actions in their national inventory. So basically ensuring that any climate progress you're making is reflected in your international reporting. And finally, we also have a number of technical assistance in best practice case studies that are posted online, which includes this piece that we recently published on women's leadership in clean energy and why it's so necessary. It's posted on the slide, but it's also in the files section of Adobe Connect. If you want to pull that down and review, we'll circulate all these materials via email as well. Through this cooperative agreement that, with USAID, we've had an opportunity to engage with many different organizations to work on clean energy, to work on low emissions development, to work on issues that we've encountered. And I've done a logo splattering on this slide here to just show some of the people we've worked with. But most notably, for this project, we work with New Energy Nexus Southeast Asia, which is a program that supports clean energy incubators and accelerators in the Southeast Asian region. They've started programs in multiple countries, so it's really been an interesting process over the last year to collaborate with them and to hear the challenges that they face and the different kind of cultural components that feed into some of the gender imbalances that we see. So, an overview of the status of women in clean tech. So as many of you are probably already aware, clean energy is a major growth sector, and countries around the world are increasingly looking to transition to low emission energy systems. Clean energy offers opportunity not just to reduce emissions, but it also can help increase resiliency of critical infrastructure, can reduce the reliance on imported fossil fuels, and lower electricity prices, and improve energy access for off-grid. So the clean energy transition presents a wide range of entrepreneurial and business opportunities. I've thrown a few stats on the page here. Looking at just 2018 alone, investments in renewable energies topped $332 billion. And as of 2017, the renewable energy sector employed 10.3 million individuals worldwide. We expect these numbers to continue to increase. And the projections show that we expect the number of jobs in the industry to triple to 29 million by 2050. While the projected growth in the renewable energy sector can be a positive catalyst for progress towards LED's goals, to date, women have not been well represented in the sector. I think energy industries, including the clean energy sector itself, has traditionally been dominated by men. And so I'm throwing a few stats here just to help kind of contextualize. Recent surveys show that women are underrepresented in both the clean energy workforce and in decision-making bodies, both in the public sector and in the private sector. We looked at some stats from IRENA that was collected in 2018, and it shows that women make up about 32% of the renewable energy workforce. So this is better than the energy sector in general, but it's still much lower than the broader community or the broader economy. Additionally, in a survey of utilities in 10 countries, USAID found that women made up only about 13% of the workforce. So it also, the numbers can vary differently when you look at different slices of the population. Women who do participate in the energy sector, both on the public and private side, are often limited to administrative roles. So it might be accounting, human resources, and marketing. Decision-making positions in governance and in business are still largely occupied by men. So looking at a 2013 survey of 72 countries, found that only 4 had female ministers overseeing some kind of national energy policy or program. In a 2016 survey, we found that in the world's largest utilities, women make up only about 14% of senior management positions and 5% of executive board membership. So there's a pretty large gap that we're looking at. The statistics on gender diversity are equally disproportionate when you really focus in on startups. So we don't actually have a lot of statistics on gender representation in the intersection of clean energy and startups, but we do have information about the broader startup ecosystem. We looked at that as a proxy. Between 2009 and 2017, the numbers show that there were about 54,700 companies that received some form of venture capital funding. And of these global companies, only about 16% had either won or more female founders. So it might be a combination of women and men in the founding. Over the past 6 years, the percentage of venture-funded companies with some representation of women in the founding team has remained unchanged, plateauing at around 17%. So we're talking about women in clean energy, women in startups, and it's not just about whether they're founding companies. We're also looking at whether or not they're able to access the financing that empowers them to succeed. So this slide shows some of the challenges with women accessing venture capital. So women make up about 17% of global startups. We found that the portion of funding that they're getting is lower than that. So in 2016, studies have shown that companies with at least one female founder raised about 19% at the seed round, but as the company's progressing, so going into the early stage VC and late stage VC, the numbers drop. So women-founded companies account for about 14% of early stage venture and only about 8% of late stage venture capital. In absolute terms, female-only or female-male founding teams raised less than 15% of all investment capital in 2007. Given the economic opportunities presented by the sector, it's essential to ensure that women business leaders and entrepreneurs are not left behind in the renewable energy transition. More equitable gender participation has repeatedly been shown to enhance development outcomes. And particularly with the UNGA happening this week, we need to think about, look at how many SDGs this addresses. I think when we talk about promoting more women in clean energy and in clean energy startups, we're talking about SDG 6, SDG 7, 8, 9, 10, 13. We're talking about gender, we're talking about economy, we're talking about inequality, and we're talking about climate change. But beyond just the development outcomes and kind of the social outcomes, the feminist outcomes, the renewable energy representation of the renewable energy sector goes beyond just a social decision. It also represents a really important business opportunity, and a business opportunity that might be being missed. Having more women participate in renewable energy startups enables the labor market. In both developing and developed countries, there's a rapid increase for demand for skills, and there's a high likelihood that companies will start to face skill gaps and labor shortages. By removing existing barriers to women's participation in the renewable energy sector and supporting better gender representation, we're increasing the pool of talent available, and we can help mitigate some of the risks moving forward. Bringing more women also can increase your productivity. There's been studies on the income loss as a result of gender gaps. I'm just throwing some stats here. I know sometimes presentations are very heavy on stats, but I think it helps solidify the argument. Gender equity could add as much as $12 trillion to the world economy if we can close some of these gaps. Also, addressing performance. Bringing women can help improve the profitability of companies. Credit Suisse did a study on the performance of about 2,400 companies that have women on their board and no women on their board. And the study found that the shares for companies with at least some female board representation outperformed companies with no women by 17 to 26% over a 6-year period. And when we talk about this performance, it's not just, we're talking about performance across multiple financial metrics and growth metrics. So higher return on equity, higher price book value multiples, better average growth, and increased profitability. When we're looking at utilities, the top 20 most gender diverse utilities significantly outperform the bottom 20 in terms of return on equity. We saw these performance premiums in the startup space as well when we had women in founding roles. So at the company scale, Boston Consulting Group and Mass Challenge found that investments in companies founded or co-founded by women, on average, had less than half of the investments compared to male-founded companies. So a male-founded company might come in an average of about $2.1 million, and women came in at less than $1 billion. So although these companies that are founded or co-founded by women tend to receive less capital from venture firms, they tend to generate better returns. And the analysis has shown that startups with at least one female co-founder generated 10% more cumulative revenue over a 5-year period. And startups with female co-founders generate 78 cents of revenue for every dollar invested, which is actually more than double the revenue generated by male-founded startups. It comes in around 31 cents per revenue per dollar generated. So we're talking about improved performance, improved return on investment, but there's also this less tangible improved innovation, right? Groups with greater diversity tend to be more innovative and make better decisions. And it kind of makes sense, right? When you bring in more women onto your team, you have a broader and greater perspective, and you can solve, I think you bring more innovative you bring more innovative thinking, and you're able to solve problems with higher complexity. And actually studies do show this to be true. This is a pretty relevant finding, particularly for nascent renewable energy companies, because they're going to need to respond to changing technological, political, and policy challenges. Oh, and ultimately, there's a consumer case here, right? Women are the main providers and users of household energy. So by accounting for them in the decision-making process and creating companies, you're also better able to meet the needs of women, of all people in our population, right? I think by enabling women to fully participate as leaders in clean energy, businesses are able to provide products that better meet their needs, and it's a really great opportunity for business to open up and leverage their participation. So we've talked about kind of the business case. What are the barriers that face women kind of entering the energy sector as business leaders? There are many, many challenges, and some of them are gender specific. They're not really tied to renewables, and some of them are. But there's a series of, I want to go over a few of them, because then Helena can talk about how some of the products we've created can address some of these barriers. So general gender equity barriers that women face. There are a number of them, and any women on the call may have faced them in their own lives. So one is just discriminating gender norms. In many countries, women are responsible for household chores and other family duties, and this limits their ability to participate in entrepreneurial and business activities. A lot of women still play that primary role, and it reduces the amount of time that they can participate in other events. There may be inequitable legal systems that are in place. Sometimes, women may have more limited rights to property or inheritance, and these things can have an impacting factor on their ability to participate in startups. Also, inequitable workplace policies. In many countries, there are policies that can hinder women's participation or advancement to leadership positions. So that it's that glass ceiling that you've heard about in other places. Workplaces may also often lack gender equitable recruiting and hiring policies. Often, as we kind of alluded to earlier in this presentation, there's limited access to financial opportunities. So it could be limited access to credit or any other kind of services that are necessary to start a business. And many women are able to access smaller sums of money to operate micro or small business. So when we go to venture capital and the larger loans, that could be a challenge. And there's studies that have demonstrated this. In some countries, many women may need to have a male counterpart to apply for a loan, or if they're able to start a business, they might be coming in with means. So it also there's an economic disparity as well. Another challenge that women face is that there's inequitable representation in the investor space. Looking at the numbers from 2018, there were only 64 female partners out of the 752 partners at the top 100 investing firms worldwide. So there are few women who are making decisions about what companies and what startups get funding. And studies have shown that male-dominated venture capital firms tend to favor startups that look like them, that are men. So getting women into that space is also important, but that's a barrier that currently faces women trying to start businesses. Women also face limited access to business training and business opportunities. And this could be, this can make it hard for women at the start to start a business or to scale up their business. And also there might be limited support for STEM careers, so anything to do with science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Depending on where you are, it could be a cultural norm, state education systems, or there could just be, in some cases, a lack of role models of women entrepreneurs and women in STEM. And these can have an adverse effect on women's participation. Looking at barriers that face women, specifically in the renewable energy sector, I think I highlighted 3 key ones. One, which is the limited ability to influence decision-making in the sector. Women are less likely to be represented in decision-making positions in public and private sector bodies. So it could be difficult for them to influence activities, and it can account for the needs and the priorities of women. And this limits the ability of women to participate in the full energy chain. There's also a woman's limited ability to be involved. Women's limited ability to be involved in decision-making can also result in gender-blind renewable energy and development policy. So looking at a 2017 global survey of national energy frameworks, we found that only 1/3 referenced women or gender. And so this fails to account for the existing inequalities that face women, and this can perpetuate some of the barriers that may already exist. And this can include barriers to education, economic opportunities, associated with renewable energy. And finally, compared to men, women often have limited access to new information on renewable energy technologies, which then also, again, prevents them from fully engaging in emerging markets. So those are all the opportunities and the barriers. I'm going to pass it over to Helena, my colleague, who will talk about ways that we can start to address this. Not a lost cause. There are things that we can do and move things forward. Helena?
Great. Thank you, Dorina. So I'm going to cover how the RALI project tackles these barriers that Dorina just discussed in order to promote women's leadership and entrepreneurship in this space. And on a personal note, as a woman who's previously worked in tech, figuring out how we could make an impact on this issue was more than just an academic exercise to me. As a software engineering intern at Roku, I was the only woman on my team, and the closest woman on my floor was 60 cubicles away. And because of this experience, I understand how much representation matters, and I wanted to find proven, actionable ways to get female representation into the clean energy sector. So the first thing we did was we took a look at the ecosystem of women in clean energy and the barriers they face. You may have heard of the concept of the leaky pipeline, where multiple barriers can force women out of the talent pipeline at different points. So for example, there's the issue of getting qualified candidates, so getting women into STEM majors in school, as well as generating interest in business and clean energy space. Then there's recruitment and selection, so making sure that qualified female candidates that are coming out of these programs are actually getting jobs in the clean energy sector. And once women are in these jobs, there are the dual challenges of ensuring that women are given career development and leadership opportunities, and that they're able to balance the family and cultural pressures. So we determined that recruiting and hiring is a key leverage point in this system, because implementing small changes in recruiting and hiring processes can have a huge difference in getting women into the field. So we took a 3-pronged approach to recruitment and selection and created materials for each of these 3 steps. So the first step was raising awareness. So we wanted to raise awareness that women are not being fully included in the clean energy transition and make the business and equity case for why they should be. Next, we identified effective recruiting and selection practices to implement. And third, we measured the results of using those practices. So I'm going to touch on each of these three aspects. So raising awareness. To do this, we created two materials. The first was an infographic, and the second was a RALI series paper, which is a 6-page paper about women in the clean energy transition. So these materials, as well as the others we've discussed, are being shared on the RALI website, and we're disseminating them through social media, but we also encourage you to spread the word. So the files, as well as other materials we're going to discuss later in the presentation, are located in the files section of Adobe Connect, so feel free to download and share those files, and also discuss this issue in your organization. So the important thing to remember is that discussing gender equity is always important and always relevant. And when we don't discuss including women in renewable energy and development policy or in recruiting and hiring practices, we actually end up creating policy and practices that primarily benefit men. So as a next step of our strategy after raising awareness, we wanted to identify effective practices for recruitment and selection. And we didn't want to research these practices in a vacuum, so we actually teamed up with New Energy Nexus in Southeast Asia, which, as Drina explained earlier, New Energy Nexus is an organization that encourages clean energy entrepreneurship by supporting and providing funds to clean energy incubators and accelerators. New Energy Nexus was struggling to get female representation in their programs, but it also wasn't their only priority. So because their incubator and accelerator partners only have a few staff members and programs to run, we wanted to make something that would be easy for them to use and more interesting than a static guidance document. So we created a workbook for clean energy incubators to both learn about and plan to implement gender-inclusive recruitment and hiring practices. And we created this in an interactive workbook format, which includes checkboxes for users to identify which practices they're already using, and text boxes to create an action plan as they're reading. And it encourages real-time planning and reflection and lays out a step-by-step plan for implementing these practices. So we really wanted to make it as easy as possible to determine what to do and how to do it. So I'm going to go over what we included in our workbook. And we focused on 4 different aspects of recruitment and selection. And so these 4 aspects are equity objectives, program visibility and outreach, recruitment materials, and selection processes. And I also wanted to note that although this workbook was built with clean energy incubators in mind, these 4 topics and the guidance as a whole is really applicable to many different recruitment and hiring processes outside of incubators and the clean energy sector. So I'm going to touch on each of these 4 aspects in the guidance document to show what we've learned. So the first focus area of the guidance is on defining equity objectives. And equity objectives are program-wide commitments to gender equity. This is really a crucial first step because they force your organization to prioritize gender equity on a significant and long-term basis. Underneath these equity objectives, you might make specific goals, like getting to equal gender representation by a certain year. Once these goals are defined, you can incorporate them into other places where your program states its goals, like mission statements, strategic initiatives, or operational plans. Lastly, you can share these goals set by your organization by including them on your website, in information sessions, postings, brochures, and emails. Sharing your gender equity goals has the dual benefit of holding your organization accountable to its goals and establishing your organization as one that's invested in gender equity. And this really makes your organization an attractive place for women in the long term. The next focus of the guidance is program visibility and outreach. So this means making sure that your organization is well known by and known to be specifically seeking female candidates. So the first step here that we suggest is partnering with organizations that focus on female entrepreneurship, women in energy, and women in STEM. So here are a few examples of women's professional organizations that we found in Southeast Asia, but these organizations are all over the place. So partnering with these organizations can help you increase program visibility and get female applicants. In our guidance, we provide sample emails for reaching out to these organizations, and we recommend co-hosting events or having them share your application materials to their membership. And next step in program visibility and outreach, we also recommend hosting pre-recruitment events. So you can host these with your new partners, the women's professional networks, and these can help build your organization's applicant pool and visibility. Or advertising these events specifically towards women can encourage them to learn more about the organization, make connections with program staff so that they have a better chance of applying and encouraging others to apply. So our next focus area that we looked at was recruitment materials. And we focused an entire section on this because we noticed when looking around the web that we saw a lot of images like this one. And this is from the Asia Clean Energy Summit website. So obviously, the Asia Clean Energy Summit is not posting this picture intentionally to discourage women from attending their conference. But as a woman looking at this sea of men, you might be a little bit less likely to attend this conference. And these types of images are really all over the place because they reflect the state of the energy sector today. But they're really not hard to change these images to be diverse and include women, and these small changes can really have an impact. Another aspect was gender-inclusive language. So we also provided suggestions for alternatives to common male-biased phrasing. So instead of saying something on your recruitment poster like we are looking for strong candidates, you could say we are looking for exceptional candidates, and these small wording changes can really have an impact. So lastly, we created these example templates to show what an inclusive poster or flyer might look like, and we included annotations on the side describing different aspects to keep in mind. So with these three aspects, including diverse images, gender-inclusive language, and going back to the equity objectives, remembering to advertise those, we kind of show what gender-inclusive recruitment materials can really look like. So the last focus area we looked at was selection process. And of all the focus areas included in our guidance, selection and hiring processes have been the most studied. So we actually found a lot of information about best practices, and we compiled this in our guidance. And many of these are actually too difficult to implement. So simple things like using consistent and objective selection criteria for your candidates, doing a blind resume review, which involves hiding any identifying gender information when reviewing resumes. Requiring a gender balance for interviews has been shown to have an impact on who's hired. And then step 4, giving your staff unconscious bias training each recruitment cycle, using competency-based interview questions. So those are questions that judge a candidate on competency rather than their interview performance. And lastly, implementing gender-based balanced selection committees. So if you're hoping to hire a gender-balanced cohort, it makes sense to have your selection committee also include women. And we include information on these practices and more in the guidance. And I see in the chat that someone was wondering if this Recruitment guidance is available, and yes, it's available online and also in the files section of Adobe Connect. So lastly, the last step in the guidance is that we have the user create a proposed action plan. So by ranking the next steps that they identified throughout the workbook, identifying a person responsible, and a date of completion and review. So what's really great about this workbook is by the time you've read through this 12-page workbook, you have a plan for implementing gender-inclusive recruitment and selection processes. And this action plan can then be saved and shared with other stakeholders. And so as you're implementing these measures, it's really important to monitor your organization's progress. And so this brings us to the third prong of our three-pronged approach, which is measuring the results. So monitoring allows you to identify where to focus your efforts and can also be a way to show off your success to your stakeholders. So for example, let's say your program was close to a 50-50 gender split on email blasts and pre-recruitment events, but the applications received consisted of only 25% women. This would help your organization, knowing this would help your organization focus your efforts on getting women into your pre-recruitment pool to apply rather than focusing on hosting more pre-recruitment events aimed towards women. So the monitoring and evaluation framework we created includes 28 indicator options to track your organization progress. And you don't have to use all 28 indicators. You can select a few indicators based on the relevance to your program and the availability of the data. And so we've included many different types of indicators, including indicators related to recruitment. That includes the number and proportion of female attendees at recruitment events and who applied for the program. There are also indicators related to perceptions, beliefs, and attitudes at your organization. So these might be things like the proportion of your staff by gender who assess themselves to be competent in mainstream gender equity. There are also indicators related to training, so the number of staff who participated in the gender equity trainings, and the number and percentage of women brought in to be speakers or mentors. Lastly, we included some indicator options related to startup, and specifically related to incubators. So for incubators, it would be really important to measure the pre and post startup metrics in your organization. So determining things like capital raised, revenue, survival rate, et before and after the program, and having that information disaggregated by gender. So that brings up a really important point, which is many of these metrics might already be tracked by your organization, but they might not be tracked on a gender disaggregated basis. So you might have the average revenue for startups in your cohort, but you may not have the average revenue for women-led startups and for men-led startups. And it's really important to have that data disaggregated by gender in order to monitor and evaluate the success of your gender equity actions. So that brings us back to our three-pronged project approach. We really think that targeting recruitment and selection can have a big impact for getting women into the clean energy sector. And we need your help to share and spread the word about the materials we've created through the RALI project. So as I've mentioned, the files are available both on the RALI website and in this Adobe Connect. We'll be emailing them around after this presentation. So in conclusion, we've done the really important first step of recognizing the barriers getting women in clean energy leadership. By sharing the knowledge we've covered today, you can implement the measures we've identified to increase women's participation. This will allow us to see the business, gender equity, and climate benefits of greater gender diversity. So I wanted to thank you all for listening, and I wanted to open it up to questions in the chat.
Great.
Dorina,
Helena.
thanks.
So I'm so happy to see folks putting questions into the chat box. I think everyone might be muted, so if you do have questions, please throw them up into the chat box. You can also unmute people, but it does get chaotic if you've ever been on a webinar when you unmute everyone because someone's always got a dog or a baby or a jazz bar in the background of where they're sitting. So we can try to start address some of the questions that are showing up. So one question was about whether the tool specifically connects to the SDGs that we had mentioned. No, our workbook doesn't specifically tie it to the SDGs, but if you go to the website for SDGs, you'll see a little bit more description and you'll see where the connections are. The ones that we see the most explicit connection would be for SDG 5, gender equality. That's simply what we're talking about with this presentation. But also affordable and clean energy. I think there are a lot of goals here that tie to that. Decent work and economic growth, reduce inequalities, and then, of course, number 13, climate action. I think if you are reporting on your program's contribution to SDGs, I would start with those ones and looking at the specific metrics and how you can report on them. I see Alicia is asking about whether this workbook has been piloted or tested. It's certainly been, we've been working with Nexus collaboratively on this, getting their input, and they have taken this into their programming. It hasn't been tested from top to bottom. Elements have been tested. We've presented on these issues about kind of understanding where the barriers are and also kind of the level of knowledge that some of the incubators and accelerators that they were working with had. So it's informed by testing, but it has not been fully piloted. If anyone here is doing some kind of clean energy program, accelerator, incubator that wants to address this, we'd love to hear from you after the fact to see what your input would be. I think Caroline is asking about the research and whether we're going to host another webinar, improving racial equity in clean tech recruitment. I think that's a really great question. I think that's a problem as well. As I mentioned earlier in our presentation, this is unfortunately the last day of our program, of the RALI program. So we won't be doing it. We see this as an opportunity for someone else to address this problem. Not that that's my logic that someone else's problem to address, but it's something that's just going to be out of scope for us. But hopefully some of the principles and some of the things that we've unearthed can support others in branching off in more equitable renewable energy in general. Pascal is asking about the energy sector. Great competition because it's well paid. At what level will I be happy in terms of integration of women? I think that's for every program to decide, but I don't see why this space should be different from the general population of 50-50. Jasmine, congratulations. Thank you. Appreciate that. And yes, I agree with you. The resources are quite useful. I think when we were pulling this together, and Helena, you and I have spoken about this quite a bit, a lot of these principles are for apply outside of just startup and just outside of clean energy. So getting these materials out and these considerations out and mainstreaming it is also a possibility. We focused, because we were working with New Energy Nexus and we were working on a kind of a demand-driven basis, we focused on startups. But certainly, I agree, this could apply in general tech or in other spaces. Yeah, so I guess I don't know if there are other questions or if anyone else wants to put up their hand. Helena, is there anything you might want to add to my responses so far?
Yeah, I think you mostly covered it. I do agree that many of these things are applicable to getting any underrepresented groups into clean tech or air tech in general, and spaces where they're not represented. And I also see that somebody's asking if we're going to share the PDF of the webinar, and yes, we will. We'll email
Ask
that
and
out
you will
after.
receive. It's posted under the file section now, and so you'll see there are 5 files there now. So you can pull it down from there. And we will be posting this webinar. We will be posting the documents so that everyone can have access. And this isn't for me. If I see any of our materials replicated or included in a presentation, I'm kind of happy about it, to be honest. Raising awareness is really important, and certainly please reference any of these documents in your work as well. So if anyone else has any questions, you're welcome to unmute yourselves by typing *6 or putting it in the chat. But other than that, please, thank you for joining our webinar. We really appreciate you listening in. And feel free to reach out to Helena or I if you have questions, comments, feelings about clean energy and increasing women's representation in the space. This is something that I think our whole team feels very strongly about, and we really hope to see on this. Sure. So having said that, I want to thank everyone for participating. I see a few people are still on the chat, and we can certainly respond to a few questions if people have it. But other than that, thank you very much. The webinar will be posted shortly.